The roast chicken sat glistening on the dining table, a centerpiece I'd spent hours preparing. Steam curled upwards, carrying the scent of rosemary and garlic. Yet the pleasant aroma did nothing to dispel the chill that had settled over me. Honestly, you're just a useless old woman now, Ezra, my own son declared, his voice sharp enough to cut through the pleasantries of Sunday lunch. Lenora, his fiancée, shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her eyes darting between Ezra and me. Julian, bless his heart, seemed oblivious, happily digging into his potatoes. More potatoes. Julian, I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He grinned. Yes, please, these are amazing. I served him another generous scoop, the clinking of the serving spoon against the china small, brittle sound in the sudden silence. Ezra continued to carve the chicken, his movements jerky and aggressive. I mean, look at you, he said, gesturing with the carving knife. You can't even carve the chicken anymore. You just sit there. His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I looked down at my hands, noticing the faint tremor in my fingers. It was true, my hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but useless. The word stung, echoing the growing list of complaints Ezra had been leveling at me lately. He'd started commenting on my appearance, my cooking, my memory, anything he could find to criticize. Lenora cleared her throat. Ezra, maybe we could, she started, but he cut her off. No, Lenora, it needs to be said. Mom needs to understand she can't just keep existing here, doing nothing. He finally placed a slice of chicken on my plate, the gesture almost an afterthought. There are places for people like you, he continued, his tone condescending, places that can take care of you. He emphasized the last two words as if speaking to a child. My heart ached. This was my home, the house I'd lived in for over 40 years, the house I'd raised my children in, and now my own son was suggesting I didn't belong here. This chicken is delicious. Mrs. Mother's last name. Julian piped up again, blissfully unaware of the tension crackling in the air. I managed a weak smile. Thank you, Julian. He was such a sweet young man, so different from Ezra. I focused on serving him more vegetables, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. But Ezra wasn't finished. We need to talk about selling this place, he said, his voice firm. It's too big for you now, too much work. And frankly, he added, his gaze sweeping over the dining room, it's a bit outdated. His words were like a physical blow. This house held so many memories, so much love and laughter within its walls. He couldn't just dismiss it like that. Ezra, I said quietly, this is my home. He scoffed. It's a liability, Mom. A drain on our resources. He turned to Lenora. Don't you agree? Honey, we could use the money from the sale for a down payment on that condo we were looking at. Lenora nodded, avoiding my gaze. It's practical, she mumbled. Practical. That was their answer for everything. Practicality over sentiment, over family, over respect. I pushed my plate away, my appetite gone. I think I'll go upstairs now, I said, rising from the table. My legs felt a little shaky, but my resolve was hardening with each condescending word, each dismissive glance. Don't you want any dessert? Julian asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I shook my head. No, "Thank you, dear." I excused myself and walked slowly out of the dining room, leaving them to their practical discussions. As I climbed the stairs, I could hear Ezra's voice continuing, his tone now animated, likely outlining his plans for my future, plans that didn't include me. The quiet of my bedroom was a welcome reprieve. I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the lunch replaying in my mind. Tears welled in my eyes, but I brushed them away angrily. I wouldn't let them see me cry. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I looked around my room, at the familiar furniture, the photographs on the walls, the books on the shelves. These were my things, my memories, my life, and I wouldn't let them take it away from me. A strange sense of calm settled over me. They thought I was useless, a burden. They thought they could just push me aside and take what was mine. They were wrong, very wrong. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the garden below. The roses were in full bloom, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside me. I watched a bee flitting from flower to flower, collecting pollen, diligently building its hive. An idea began to form in my mind, a small seed of defiance taking root. I wouldn't let them win. I would find a way to protect myself, to secure what was rightfully mine. The house may be outdated, but the paperwork wasn't. And there were more ways to secure a home than just locking the doors. The guest house felt colder than usual that evening. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Ezra's words echoing in my ears. "Useless old woman," he'd spat, his voice dripping with contempt. I closed my eyes, but the image of his sneering face, Lenora sitting silently beside him, was burned into my eyelids. I rolled over, pulling the covers tight around me, but the chill seemed to seep into my bones. I tried to think of anything else, anything to drown out the hurt. But it was no use. Every happy memory, every family gathering, now felt tainted by his cruelty. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand. 11:32 p.m. Sleep was a distant, unattainable luxury. I sat up, letting my legs dangle over the side of the bed. The floorboards creaked under my feet, the sound strangely comforting in the suffocating silence. I walked over to the window and looked out at the main house, bathed in the soft glow of the porch light. It was my house, the house I'd poured my heart and soul into, the house I'd raised my children in, and now my own son treated me like an unwelcome guest in it. How did it come to this? I whispered to the empty room. The question hung in the air, unanswered. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, but it wasn't the kind that invited sleep. It was a bone-deep weariness, a feeling of being utterly depleted. I shivered, despite the summer heat. I felt hollowed out, as if some vital part of me had been carved away, leaving only an empty shell. I walked over to the small desk in the corner and opened the top drawer. Inside, beneath a stack of old photographs, was a small wooden box. I lifted it out, running my fingers over the smooth, polished surface. My father had given it to me when I was a little girl. He'd told me it was a place to keep my most precious treasures. I opened the lid. Inside, nestled amongst faded ribbons and dried flowers, was a small, tarnished silver locket. I picked it up, its weight surprisingly heavy in my palm. I opened it. Inside were two tiny photographs, one of my mother, the other of my father. They were both smiling, their eyes full of warmth and love. A single tear escaped my eye and traced a path down my cheek. "I miss you both so much," I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. "I wish you were here." I closed the locket, clutching it tightly in my hand. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the warmth and security I remembered from my childhood, a time before the hurt, before the betrayal, but the feeling was fleeting. The reality of my present situation crashed back down on me, suffocating me with its weight. I placed the locket back in the box, closing the lid gently. I knew I couldn't stay in the guest house, not tonight. The walls felt too close, the air too thick with unspoken words. I needed space. I needed to breathe. I stood up, my legs shaky. I pulled on a light cardigan and slipped out the door into the stillness of the night. The air outside was cool against my skin, a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the guest house. I walked towards the main house, my footsteps slow and deliberate. As I approached the front door, I noticed a light on in the living room. I could hear the muffled sound of voices. Lenora and Julian, probably. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Part of me wanted to turn back, to retreat to the solitude of the guest house. But another part of me, a part I hadn't recognized before, refused to be pushed aside. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The voices stopped abruptly. Lenora and Julian were sitting on the sofa, watching television. They both turned to look at me, their expressions a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "Mother," Lenora said, her voice tinged with apprehension. "What are you doing here?" I met her gaze, my own steady and unwavering. "This is my house," I said quietly. "I can be wherever I please." I walked past them, heading towards the stairs. "I'm going to bed." As I climbed the stairs, I could feel their eyes on my back. But I didn't turn around. I walked into my bedroom, closed the door, and leaned against it, letting out a long, shaky breath. The small act of defiance, of reclaiming my space, had exhausted me, but it had also given me a flicker of hope, a small spark of resolve that had been buried beneath layers of hurt and resentment. I walked over to the window and looked out at the garden, bathed in the soft moonlight. The roses I'd planted years ago were in full bloom, their fragrance drifting in on the night air. I closed my eyes, inhaling their sweet perfume. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of peace, a sense that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. The locket, the house, the roses, they were all reminders of a time before the hurt, before the betrayal, and they were also symbols of hope, symbols of a future where I could reclaim my life, my home, and my sense of self. The night was still young, and the silence held a promise of change. Dawn broke, painting the sky in streaks of pale pink and gray. I hadn't slept a wink. Ezra's words, "a useless old woman," echoed in the hollow spaces of the night, sharper than any insomnia. They scraped against the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, sounds that had once been the comforting soundtrack of my home. Now they just amplified the emptiness. I rose with the sun, a strange calm settling over me. It wasn't resignation, not exactly. It was something else, something quieter, more deliberate. I pulled on my gardening gloves, the worn leather familiar against my skin. Time to get to work, I murmured to myself, my voice a low rumble in the stillness. The porch swing creaked rhythmically as I walked past, its chains rusted and stiff. "I'll get to you later," I whispered, touching the peeling paint. The front steps sagged slightly on one side, a hazard I'd meant to address for months. "And you too," I said, running a hand along the chipped wood. I started with the flower beds, pulling weeds that had choked the vibrant blooms I'd planted years ago. Each tug, each toss into the growing pile, felt like a small victory. "They may think I'm useless," I muttered, "but this garden knows better." The rose bushes, heavy with dew-kissed buds, seemed to nod in agreement. The shed door squealed in protest as I opened it, revealing a jumble of forgotten tools and half-finished projects. "Let's see what we have here," I said, surveying the dusty shelves. I found a small hammer, its handle smooth from years of use, and a box of nails. I started with the porch steps, carefully hammering each nail, securing the loose boards. The rhythmic clang of the hammer echoed in the morning air, a counterpoint to the silence of the house. As I worked, the sun climbed higher, chasing away the lingering chill. I moved on to the porch swing, filing the rusty chains until they moved smoothly and silently. "Much better," I said, testing the swing with a gentle push. The rhythmic creaking was gone, replaced by a soft, soothing sway. I repainted the peeling frame, the fresh white gleaming against the weathered wood of the porch. With each small repair, a sense of purpose settled over me, a quiet determination to reclaim my space piece by piece. By midday, the porch looked almost new. The steps were sturdy, the swing gleamed in the sunlight, and the flower beds burst with color. I surveyed my work, a small smile playing on my lips. "Not bad for a useless old woman," I murmured. I stepped inside, the silence of the house no longer oppressive, but filled with the quiet hum of accomplishment. I made myself a cup of tea, the warmth spreading through me as I sat by the window, watching the sunlight dance on the freshly painted porch swing. The afternoon was spent sorting through old photographs, each one a memory captured in time. Lenora as a child, her pigtails bouncing as she chased butterflies in the garden. Ezra grinning mischievously as he held up a freshly caught fish. Family holidays, birthdays, graduations, a lifetime of memories, both joyful and bittersweet. "This house," I whispered, running my hand over a photo of Lenora and Julian's engagement party. "It holds so much history." A wave of sadness washed over me, followed by a surge of resolve. "And it's mine." I spent the next few days in a similar rhythm, working quietly, methodically. I fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen, replaced the flickering light bulb in the hallway, and organized the cluttered pantry. Each small task was a quiet act of defiance, a way of reclaiming my home, my life. I started spending more time in the garden, tending to the roses, nurturing the new seedlings. It was a solace, a place where I could find peace amidst the turmoil. One evening, as I was watering the roses, I saw a letter tucked under the front door. It was from a lawyer, confirming my sole ownership of the house. A small, triumphant smile touched my lips. "It's official," I whispered, the words barely audible above the chirping of crickets. "This house is mine." The feeling of ownership, of control, settled over me like a warm blanket. It was a feeling I hadn't realized I'd been missing, a feeling I was determined to hold on to. The next day, I made a trip to the hardware store. "I need new locks," I told the clerk, my voice firm. "All of them." He raised an eyebrow, but I didn't offer an explanation. I returned home, armed with a box of shiny new locks and a newfound sense of purpose. I changed every lock in the house, the front door, the back door, even the shed. As I tightened the last screw, a wave of satisfaction washed over me. "Now," I murmured, "let's see how they get in." I found a piece of cardboard and a marker and wrote a simple message: "Respect is required for entry." I taped the sign to the front door. The bold black letters, a stark contrast to the freshly painted white. Standing back, I surveyed my work. The house felt different now, stronger, more secure. It was no longer just a house. It was my sanctuary, my fortress. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat by the window, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky. A quiet calm settled over me, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The house was silent, but it was no longer an empty silence. It was the silence of solitude, of strength, of quiet triumph. And in that silence, I knew I was finally home. The stale smell of yesterday's untouched casserole clung to the kitchen air. Sunlight, sharp and unforgiving, sliced through the blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing above the sink. I hadn't slept a wink. Ezra's words, "a useless old woman," echoed in the hollow spaces of the night, each repetition a fresh wound. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of tea, the porcelain cold against my palm. From upstairs, I heard the muffled murmur of voices. Ezra and Lenora. I recognized the particular cadence of their conversation, the low, conspiratorial tone they adopted when discussing me. Curiosity, or perhaps a masochistic urge to confirm my suspicions, propelled me towards the staircase. I paused at the bottom step, straining to hear. "She barely touched her food last night," Lenora said, her voice laced with a mixture of exasperation and something else, something that sounded suspiciously like satisfaction. "Let her sulk." Ezra's voice, gruff and dismissive. "It's not like she contributes anything anyway. Do you think she'll finally agree to move into that assisted living place?" Lenora's question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken expectations. My heart sank. Assisted living. The very idea sent a chill down my spine. This house, this home, I built it, brick by painstaking brick, with my own two hands, alongside my late husband. Every floorboard, every window pane held a memory, a piece of our life together, and now they wanted to discard me, like some unwanted piece of furniture. "We'll see," Ezra said. "If she keeps this up, she won't have much choice." I retreated back to the kitchen, the words a physical blow. The lukewarm tea tasted like ash in my mouth. Choice. They thought I had no choice. They saw me as a burden, a fragile, fading shadow of my former self. They couldn't have been more wrong. I stood up, a newfound resolve hardening my gaze. I walked over to the overflowing junk drawer, the one Ezra constantly complained about, the one Lenora declared a lost cause. I pulled it open, the contents a jumbled mess of tangled wires, dead batteries, and mismatched screws. For years, I'd meant to organize it, but somehow, other things always seemed more pressing. Now, as I sifted through the debris, a strange sense of calm washed over me. This drawer, this small act of reclaiming order, was a start. I found a small screwdriver, its handle worn smooth with age. I tightened the loose screws on the cabinet doors, silencing their irritating squeak. I replaced the flickering bulb above the sink, the sudden brightness startling in its intensity. I even managed to fix the leaky faucet. The steady drip that had been driving me mad for weeks finally ceasing. These small victories, insignificant as they might seem, filled me with a quiet satisfaction. They were a reminder that I was still capable, still in control, at least of this small corner of my world. As I worked, I began to formulate a plan. A quiet plan, a subtle plan, a plan they would never see coming. They thought they knew me, this frail, aging woman, content to fade into the background. They had no idea of the strength that lay dormant within me, the steel that had been forged in the fires of loss and hardship. They underestimated me. That was their mistake. I spent the rest of the day immersed in my tasks. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, erasing every trace of dust and neglect. I polished the silver, the gleam of the metal reflecting my own determined gaze. I even baked a fresh apple pie, the aroma filling the house with a warmth that had been absent for far too long. Later that evening, as I sat alone in the living room, a legal document lay open on the coffee table. It was the deed to the house, the one I had signed years ago, transferring ownership to Ezra. I had done it out of love, out of a desire to secure his future. Now, I saw it as a mistake, a vulnerability I had unwittingly exposed. I picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Hello, David. It's Martha. I need your help." David was my lawyer, an old friend of the family. "I need to make some changes to my will." The conversation was brief, to the point. I explained my situation, my voice steady and unwavering. David listened patiently, offering his advice and support. By the time I hung up, a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The first piece of the puzzle was in place. The following days were a blur of activity. I met with David several times, finalizing the paperwork. I contacted a locksmith, arranging for all the locks on the house to be changed. I even went shopping, purchasing a small, elegant sign for the front door. It read, simply, "Respect is required for entry." I watched from the kitchen window as Ezra and Lenora pulled into the driveway, their faces etched with confusion. They tried the front door, jiggling the handle in frustration. Then they saw the sign. Ezra's face turned a deep shade of red. He pounded on the door, his voice a muffled roar. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned back to the sink, a small smile playing on my lips. The faucet, once a constant source of irritation, now flowed smoothly, a steady stream of clear, clean water. I had fixed it. I had fixed more than just a leaky faucet. I had fixed my life. The house was mine again, and they had a choice to make. The thin morning light filtered through the dusty windows of the guest house, a place I'd retreated to after Ezra's cruel words echoed in my ears. "Useless old woman," he'd spat, the words slicing through me like a jagged knife. I hadn't slept a wink. Every creak of the old house seemed to amplify the emptiness inside me. I sat up, the thin blanket pooling around my legs, and looked around the small room. It was cluttered with discarded furniture, boxes filled with forgotten memories, and tools I'd used when this house was just a frame. My hand brushed against something hard beneath a pile of old curtains. I pulled it out my old plumbing wrench. The metal was cool and familiar in my hand, its weight strangely comforting. I traced the grooves in the handle, each one a testament to years of use. I remembered the day the kitchen sink backed up, water overflowing onto the newly laid tile. Ezra, just a boy then, had panicked, running around in circles. "Mom, what are we going to do?" he cried, his voice high-pitched with fear. Lenora, not even a teenager yet, had stood frozen, wide-eyed. "It's all right," I'd said calmly, grabbing this very wrench. Within an hour, I'd fixed the blockage, the water receding like a defeated army. Ezra had hugged me tight, his small arms round my waist. "You're the best, Mom," he'd mumbled into my shirt. I ran my thumb over a particularly deep nick in the wrench's handle, a memory surfacing. The time the upstairs bathroom pipe burst in the middle of the night, spraying water across the ceiling. Julian, still just Lenora's boyfriend then, had looked utterly bewildered. "I'll call a plumber," he'd stammered, fumbling for his phone. But I'd already assessed the damage. "No need," I'd said, grabbing a bucket and my wrench. By sunrise, the leak was stopped, the worst of the damage contained. "You're a lifesaver," Lenora had whispered, her eyes filled with gratitude. The wrench felt heavy in my hand, not just with its own weight, but with the weight of all the times I had kept this house running, kept this family afloat. I'd patched leaky roofs, fixed broken appliances, painted walls, and laid floors. This house, every inch of it, held my sweat, my effort, my love. And now, in this very house, my own son had called me useless. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Useless. I'd built this house, brick by brick, nurtured this family, day by day. I was the foundation, the backbone, the very heart of this home, and they treated me like a discarded piece of furniture. I stood up, the wrench still clutched tight in my hand. The sun was climbing higher, casting long shadows across the cluttered room. I looked round, a strange sense of calm settling over me. This wasn't a place of exile. It was a sanctuary, a place where I could regroup, remember who I was, what I was capable of. I walked over to a dusty box and began rummaging through it, pulling out old photographs, faded letters, and legal documents. My fingers brushed against a familiar folder, the embossed lettering barely visible beneath a layer of dust. I pulled it out, a faint smile playing on my lips. The deed to this house. My house. The realization settled in my bones, a quiet strength replacing the hollowness I'd felt just moments before. This wasn't just a house. It was my legacy, a testament to my hard work, my resilience, my love, and I wouldn't let anyone, not even my own son, take that away from me. I carefully placed the deed on a small, cleared table next to the wrench, to symbols of my power, my connection to this place. Then I walked over to the window and looked out at the main house, bathed in the morning sunlight. It looked peaceful, serene, unaware of the storm brewing within its walls, a storm that I, the quiet, useless old woman was about to unleash. I spent the rest of the morning going through the boxes, sorting through memories, reclaiming pieces of myself I thought I'd lost. I found old sketches I'd made when planning the house, blueprints detailing every nook and cranny, photographs documenting the construction process. Each item I unearthed reinforced my connection to this place, reminded me of the strength I possessed, the strength to build, the strength to nurture, and now the strength to reclaim what was rightfully mine. By midday, the small room felt less like a place of exile and more like a command center. I had a plan forming, a quiet, subtle plan that would restore the balance, remind everyone who truly held the power in this family. I looked at the wrench and the deed, two silent allies in my upcoming battle. The silence in the guest house was no longer the silence of defeat, but the silence of anticipation, the quiet before the storm. And I, the eye of the storm, was ready. The small guest house felt colder than usual that night. I couldn't shake Ezra's words, a useless old woman, echoing in my ears. He'd said it so casually, so dismissively, right in front of Lenora and Julian. Julian, bless his heart, had looked uncomfortable, but Lenora just sipped her tea, a tight little smile on her face. "I made this tea, Ezra," I'd said quietly, my voice trembling slightly. He'd just grunted in response, not even looking up from his phone. Now, hours later, sleep was a distant dream. I sat at the small, worn table, a single lamp illuminating the notepad in front of me. I started writing a grocery list, a mundane task, but somehow it felt grounding. Milk, eggs, bread, staples I always provided, the things they took for granted. I always buy the good jam, the kind Ezra likes. I murmured to myself, adding it to the list. Even now, after everything, I still thought of what he liked. This little guest house. It was supposed to be my sanctuary, a place to escape the constant reminders of my diminished role in their lives. But even here, their shadows lingered. I opened the drawer of the nightstand, looking for a pen to add detergent to the list. My hand brushed against a stiff, legal-sized envelope. I pulled it out, curious. It was dusty, the paper yellowed with age. "What is this doing here?" I wondered aloud. My heart quickened as I recognized the embossed lettering. County Recorder's Office. I flipped it open. Inside, nestled amongst other papers, was the deed to the house, the actual, physical deed. I hadn't seen it in years. I thought Ezra had it locked away in his safe. I whispered, tracing my fingers over my name, the rightful owner of the property. A wave of something akin to power surged through me. This house, the one I'd poured my heart and soul into, the one I'd raised my children in, it was still mine, legally, undeniably mine. I carefully placed the deed back in the envelope and tucked it safely into my purse. The grocery list seemed insignificant now, a flimsy piece of paper compared to the weight of the document I now possessed. "They think I'm just a doddering old woman," I said, a flicker of steel entering my voice. "They think I'm relevant." I looked around the small guest house, at the worn furniture and faded curtains. This space, small as it was, represented my independence. It was a separate building, detached from the main house, originally intended for visiting family. It had become my refuge, a place they rarely entered. They treat this place like an afterthought, like me, I muttered, clenching my hand. But the deed changed everything. I spent the next few hours going through the other papers in the envelope. Old tax documents, insurance policies, even the original blueprints of the house. I remember picking out the tiles for the kitchen. I reminisced, a faint smile touching my lips. It was a Tuscan-style villa, a dream home I'd designed myself years before Ezra's arrogance and Lenora's subtle manipulations had chipped away at my sense of belonging. I wanted a place filled with warmth, with love, I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. Now it felt more like a gilded cage, but holding the deed, knowing what it represented, sparked a long dormant flame within me. It was a spark of defiance, a refusal to be erased. I glanced at the clock. It was almost dawn. The first rays of sunlight were beginning to peek through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. I stood up, the deed still clutched in my hand. They think they can treat me like this, I said, my voice stronger now, steadier. They think they can just push me aside. A plan was forming, a slow, deliberate plan, taking shape in the quiet hours of the night. I didn't know all the details yet, but one thing was certain. I was no longer going to be silent. I was the owner of this house, and they were going to learn what that truly meant. I would reclaim what was rightfully mine, not with shouts and accusations, but with quiet, decisive action. They wouldn't see it coming. They thought they had me cornered, relegated to this small guest house. They were wrong. The game was far from over. It had, in fact, just begun. I walked over to the window and looked out at the sprawling grounds, the manicured lawns, the shimmering pool, all bathed in the soft morning light. It's all mine, I whispered, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. And they're going to learn to respect that. The grocery list lay forgotten on the table, a testament to the life I had lived, the life they assumed I would continue to live. But the deed, safely tucked away in my purse, held the promise of a new beginning, a life where I would finally regain control. Sunlight streamed through the dusty window of the guest house, illuminating the boxes stacked almost to the ceiling. Useless, Ezra had sneered, his voice still echoing in my ears. A useless old woman cluttering up the house. I ran a hand over a chipped porcelain doll, a relic from Lenora's childhood. I remembered the day I'd bought it for her, a bright Saturday morning market trip, now relegated to a dusty box in the guest house. It felt like a symbol of my own displacement. I shifted a stack of old photo albums, their covers faded, and a small metal box caught my eye. It was tucked away behind a pile of linens, almost hidden. Curiosity piqued. I pulled it out, wiping away the years of accumulated dust. The latch was stiff, but it gave way with a small click. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed tissue paper, lay the deed to the house. My house. I traced the embossed lettering with my fingertip. Every brick, every beam, every nail I'd poured my heart and soul into this house. My late husband, bless his soul, had been a dreamer, a man with grand visions, but little practical skill. This house will be our legacy, he'd said, his eyes shining with hope. And so I'd become the builder, the planner, the one who turn those dreams into reality. I'd haggled with contractors, overseen every stage of construction, even learned to lay tiles myself when the budget got tight. I'd painted the walls, planted the garden, and made this house a home. And now my own son, the beneficiary of all that hard work, treated me like an unwelcome guest. A wave of anger washed over me, hot and sharp, but it was quickly replaced by a steely resolve. This house was mine. I had the legal documents to prove it. Ezra might think he could push me aside, treat me like I was nothing, but he was wrong. I wouldn't be banished to the guest house like some forgotten relic. I wouldn't let him erase my history, my contribution, my very presence in this house. I carefully placed the deed back in its box, a small but significant piece of my future now firmly in my grasp. The next few days were a blur of quiet activity. I started small, almost imperceptibly. The leaky faucet in the downstairs bathroom that had been dripping for months fixed. The loose floorboard in the hallway that creaked with every step secured. The flickering light in the kitchen replaced. Small acts of reclamation, each one a silent assertion of my presence, my ownership. I even started venturing back into the main house, moving a few boxes back from the guest house, reclaiming space inch by inch. Lenora noticed. I could tell. She'd glance at me, a flicker of something in her eyes, confusion, maybe even a hint of apprehension. "Mom," she'd say hesitantly, "are you moving back in?" "Just sorting through some things, dear," I'd reply mildly, a small smile playing on my lips. I wasn't ready to reveal my hand just yet. I was playing a long game. One afternoon, while Lenora and Julian were out, I made my next move. I called a locksmith, a reputable local man I'd used years ago when we'd first moved in. "I need all the locks changed," I told him, my voice firm. "Every single one." He arrived promptly, a quiet, efficient man who asked no questions. He worked quickly, replacing the old locks with shiny new ones, handing me a set of keys with a respectful nod. As I held those keys in my hand, a sense of power coursed through me. These keys weren't just to the house, they were to my future, to my autonomy. I was taking back what was rightfully mine. The final piece of my plan fell into place a few days later. I'd been going through some old files, my late husband's paperwork, when I came across a small, leather-bound book. It was his journal, filled with his dreams and aspiration for the house, for our family. As I flipped through the brittle pages, a particular entry caught my eye. It was a sketch, a rough drawing of a sign he'd envisioned hanging by the front door. "Respect is the key to this house," it read, his handwriting looping and elegant, a poignant reminder of the values he'd cherished, values that seemed to have been forgotten. I decided to bring his vision to life. I commissioned a local artisan to create a beautiful wooden sign engraved with those same words. It was a tribute to my husband, a symbol of the home we'd built together, and a clear message to those who had forgotten its meaning. The day it arrived, I hung it by the front door, right where my husband had envisioned it. It was a silent declaration, a visible marker of the shift in power. The house was mine, and entry would be granted only on my terms. The satisfaction I felt was profound, a quiet victory, savored in the stillness of my reclaimed home. Now I waited. The pieces were in place, the stage was set. It was only a matter of time before the curtain rose on the final act. The thin walls of the guest house did little to muffle Ezra's voice. "She's acting so strange lately," he was saying to Lenora. "Ever since that argument, she's been different." I pressed my ear closer to the wall, a bitter smile playing on my lips. "Different," he says. "Yes, Ezra, I am different. I'm done being your doormat." "It's creepy," Lenora replied, her voice laced with a whine I'd come to recognize. "Like she's plotting something." Plotting, perhaps. Planning, most definitely. I moved away from the wall, my hand drifting to the worn cover of the small, leather-bound book resting on the bedside table. Inside were the documents, the proof, the key to everything. I opened it, tracing the embossed lettering on the title page. "Last Will and Testament." My late husband, bless his soul, had been a wise man. He'd foreseen something. Not this exactly, but something. He'd ensured I was protected. The house, everything, was mine, mine alone. And now I was going to use that protection. I closed the book, a sense of calm settling over me. For weeks, the humiliation had festered, a burning ember in my chest. Ezra's words, "a useless old woman," echoed in my mind. But now they held no power. They were just words, empty and meaningless against the solid weight of the legal documents in my hand. "You thought you could push me aside, Ezra," I whispered to the empty room. "You thought I wouldn't fight back." The first step had been subtle, almost invisible. Fixing the leaky faucet, tightening the loose doorknob, replacing the flickering light bulb in the hallway. Small acts of defiance, reclaiming my space, my territory. Ezra hadn't even noticed, too preoccupied with his own self-importance. Lenora, even less so. She'd never lifted a finger in this house, content to let me, the useless old woman, take care of everything. But the real work, the true reclamation, had started the day I visited Mr. Henderson, my late husband's lawyer. He'd been surprised to see me, a little flustered even. "Mrs. Davies," he'd said, his hand hovering over the thick file on his desk. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" "I need to review some documents," I'd replied, my voice steady, regarding the ownership of my house. The look on his face, a mixture of confusion and was it pity? It had fueled me. He'd pulled out the file, explained everything, the legalese washing over me in a wave of vindication. It was all there in black and white. The house, the land, everything was legally mine. Ezra had no claim, no right to dictate how I lived, where I slept, what I did. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I'd said, gathering the documents, a sense of purpose hardening my resolve. "This is helpful." Now, sitting in the quiet solitude of the guest house, I reviewed the locksmith's number. Tomorrow, they would arrive, bright and early. New locks all round, every door, every window. A fresh start, a clean slate. "I wonder what Ezra will say," I murmured, a genuine smile finally breaking through the weariness. "When he finds himself locked out." I imagine the scene, Ezra pounding on the front door, Lenora fluttering around him like a distressed moth. "Mom, open up," he'd yell, his voice laced with indignation. "What's the meaning of this?" Lenora would chime in. "We have Julian coming over for dinner. This is so embarrassing." I pictured myself watching from the window, a silent observer of their confusion and frustration. I wouldn't answer their calls, their frantic knocks. I would let them stew, let them simmer in their own bewilderment. Then, when the time was right, I would open the door. I would stand there tall and resolute, the key to my house, my life, clutched firmly in my hand. "Ezra," I would say, my voice calm and even, "Lenora, I believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding the ownership of this property." I picked up a piece of paper and a pen, starting to draft a small sign. Neat, block letters, clear and concise. "Respect is required for entry." I would tape it to the front door, a final, unmistakable message. This was my house, my rules, and they, Ezra and Lenora, were about to learn a valuable lesson about respect. The thought warmed me, a comforting glow spreading through the chill of the guest house. Tomorrow, a new chapter would begin, a chapter where I, the useless old woman, held the key. The bell above Mr. Beeksley's door jingled a cheerful welcome, a stark contrast to the steel resolve hardening in my gut. "Morning, Mrs. Davies," Mr. Beeksley greeted me, his smile as warm as the summer air outside. "What can I do for you today?" I returned a small smile, clutching my handbag a little tighter. "I need a full set of new locks, Mr. Beeksley," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "For all the doors in my house, including the back gate and the shed." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "Everything?" he asked. "That's quite the undertaking. Something wrong with the old ones. They're outdated," I replied, a carefully neutral word chosen to mask the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. "It's time for a change." He nodded, accepting my explanation without further probing. "Of course. Security is important. Do you have the old keys with you? Makes it easier to match the mechanisms." I placed the entire ring of keys on the counter. They felt heavier than usual, weighted with years of memories, both good and bad. "These are all of them," I confirmed. Mr. Beeksley examined the keys, a low whistle escaping his lips. "Quite a collection," he remarked. "Some of these are antiques. You've lived in that house a long time, haven't you?" "A lifetime," I murmured, my gaze drifting to the street outside, where a young couple strolled hand in hand, their laughter echoing in the quiet morning air. I thought of Lenora and Julian, of their upcoming wedding, of the future they were building together, a future I had hoped to be a part of, a future that now felt uncertain. "So, high security locks then." Mr. Beeksley's voice brought me back to the present. "Deadbolts? Anything fancy?" I considered for a moment. "Yes," I said finally. "The best you have. I want to feel safe." The word hung in the air, a small, fragile thing. Mr. Beeksley nodded, his expression turning serious. "I understand. I can certainly recommend some excellent options. We have some new smart locks, keyless entry, very secure." He began showing me brochures, explaining the intricacies of different locking mechanisms, the benefits of keypads versus traditional keys. I listened attentively, asking questions, absorbing the information. This was more than just about changing locks. It was about taking back control, about reclaiming my space, my peace of mind. I'll take the smart locks for the front and back doors, I decided, and deadbolts for everything else. I want to be thorough. He smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. Thorough is good, he agreed, especially these days. He wrote down the order, calculating the cost. While he worked, my mind raced, planning the next steps. New locks were just the beginning. There were other changes I needed to make, other measures to put in place. I paid for the locks, arranging for installation the following week. As I left the shop, the jingle of the bell sounded different now, less like a welcome and more like a declaration of independence, of resolve, of a new chapter beginning. The sun felt warmer on my face as I walked back to my car. I had a list of errands to run, things to buy, preparations to make. The weight in my handbag was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose, a quiet anticipation. The house had been my sanctuary for so long, a place of love and laughter, of family gatherings and cherished memories. Then, it had become a place of quiet suffering, of disrespect and disregard, but it was still my house, and I was taking it back, piece by piece, lock by lock. I was reclaiming my home, my life, my future. The game, as they say, was afoot. I stopped at the hardware store next, picking up a small can of paint and a new doormat. A simple, elegant mat with the word welcome woven into the fibers. It was a small gesture, but a significant one, a reminder that my house was a place of welcome, but only for those who respected its boundaries and its owner. The rest could stay out. I drove home, a sense of calm settling over me, the quiet hum of the engine, the familiar streets passing by, the anticipation of what lay ahead. It all filled me with a strange sense of peace. I parked in the driveway looking at the house. My house. It stood silent and still, bathed in the afternoon sun. But behind its closed doors, a transformation was already underway, a quiet revolution, led by a woman who had been underestimated for far too long. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was just the beginning. The crisp evening air swirled around me as I stood on the porch, the new key cool in my hand. The locksmith finished up, packing his tools. "All done, Mum. These are high security. Nobody's getting in without your say-so." He tipped his hat and headed to his van. "Have a good evening." I nodded, a small, tight smile playing on my lips. "You too," I replied, watching him drive off down the street. Turning back to the house, I took one last look at the familiar door before inserting the key and turning the lock. A solid, satisfying click echoed the feeling in my chest. It was done. I went inside, the house quiet and still. The lingering scent of lemon polish hung in the air, a testament to the hours I'd spent these past few days, restoring the house to its former glory. I'd scrubbed and polished every surface, mended the frayed curtains, even replaced the flickering porch light. Each small act had been a quiet rebellion, a reclaiming of what was mine. This house, this home, I had poured my life into it, and I wasn't about to let it be tainted by disrespect. I moved through the rooms, touching the polished wood of the banister, the smooth coolness of the marble countertop, It felt different now, lighter, somehow free. I went upstairs to my bedroom and looked out the window, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Down below, a car pulled into the driveway. It was Ezra. I watched as he got out of the car, Lenora trailing behind him. They approached the front door, Ezra fumbling with his keys. He jiggled the handle, rattled the door, then started pounding. "Mom, open the door." "What's going on?" he yelled, his voice laced with impatience. Lenora stood beside him, looking confused. "Maybe she's not home," she offered tentatively. Ezra scoffed. Where else would she be? I watched them for a moment longer, a strange calm settling over me. Then I went downstairs, unlocked the door, and pulled it open. Ezra stumbled forward, almost falling into the entryway. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his face flushed with anger. "Why is the door locked?" "I locked it," I said calmly, meeting his gaze. "Locked it. Why, I live here," he sputtered. "No, Ezra," I corrected him gently. "You stay here. This house is mine." I held up the deed, the embossed lettering gleaming in the porch light. "I own this house, and I make the rules." Lenora gasped, but we thought she trailed off, looking from me to Ezra. "You thought what?" I asked, my voice still even, that I was just a useless old woman, too feeble to notice, too weak to care, that I would just sit idly by while you treated my home, my sanctuary, with such disregard. Ezra's face paled. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. He knew exactly what I was talking about. The careless comments, the dismissive gestures, the blatant disrespect, it had all culminated in this moment. "From now on," I continued, "there are rules. If you wish to stay here, you will treat this house and everyone in it with respect. You will contribute your fair share, and you will understand that this is my home, not yours. Do you understand?" Ezra looked stunned, his usual arrogance replaced by a bewildered uncertainty. He glanced at Lenora, who simply shrugged, clearly as surprised as he was. He turned back to me, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Mom," he mumbled. "Good," I said, stepping aside. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." I gestured towards a small, framed sign I had placed on the wall beside the door. It read, "Respect is the key to this house. Treat it accordingly." They entered, their footsteps hesitant, their demeanor subdued. As I closed the door behind them, I noticed something else, a large, unopened box leaning against the wall in the hallway. It was addressed to me. Curious, I picked it up and carried it into the kitchen. Inside, nestled amongst layers of tissue paper, was a beautiful antique clock. A note lay on top. It simply read, "For the keeper of time and home, with love, from Julian's parents." I smiled, a genuine smile this time, as I set the clock on the mantelpiece. It chimed softly, a melodious counterpoint to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The house felt warm and full again, not just with people, but with something more profound, a sense of peace, of belonging, of ownership. It was a feeling I had almost forgotten, a feeling I thought I had lost. But tonight, I had reclaimed it. Tonight, I was home, and I was in control. The scent of roasting chicken filled the air, promising a new beginning, a new chapter. But as I looked at Ezra and Lenora across the table, their faces still etched with uncertainty. I knew this was just the beginning. There were more lessons to be learned, more boundaries to be set, and I was ready. The morning sunlight slanted across the newly polished floorboards, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. I stood back and admired the gleaming wood, so different from the dull, neglected surface it had been just a few days ago. Every squeak, every loose tile, every dripping faucet all fixed. This house, my house, finally felt like mine again. I'd spent the last few days quietly, methodically putting things right, reclaiming the space that had felt so alienated from me. It's amazing what a little elbow grease can do, I murmured to myself, smoothing down the crisp new tablecloth on the dining room table. Now for the final touch. I walked to the front door, a small, neatly lettered sign in my hand. It was simple, plain even, but the words held weight. Respect is required for entry, it read. I carefully affixed it to the door, right next to the freshly installed lock. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. Julian and Lenora were due back from their weekend trip later today. I pictured them pulling up in Julian's flashy car, their laughter echoing as they walked up the path. They wouldn't have a key, of course. I'd seen to that. I wonder how long it will take them to notice, I thought, a flicker of amusement dancing in my eyes. I moved to the kitchen window, peering through the lace curtains as a delivery van pulled up across the street. Perfect timing, I said, a genuine smile finally breaking through. The delivery driver, a young man with kind eyes, carried a large, heavy box to my front door. I hurried to open it before he could even ring the bell. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, his voice cheerful. "I have a delivery for you." "Thank you so much," I replied, taking the delivery slip from him. "Just inside the door will be fine." He wrestled the box inside, grunting slightly with the effort. "Have a nice day, Mum," he called as he headed back to his van. "You too," I replied, closing the door firmly behind him. I turned back to the box, anticipation bubbling inside me. It contained the final piece of my plan, a new, state-of-the-art security system, complete with cameras covering every angle of the property. I'd spent hours researching the best system, ensuring it had all the features I needed: remote access, motion detection, high-definition recording. Nothing would escape my notice now. "Let the games begin," I whispered, a touch of steel in my voice. I spent the next few hours setting up the system, carefully positioning the cameras and configuring the software. The user interface was surprisingly intuitive, and I quickly mastered the controls. I could now view the live feed from my phone, tablet, or computer from anywhere in the world. A little peace of mind, I mused, testing the motion alerts. The notification pinged on my phone almost instantly. Efficient. I nodded, satisfied. As evening approached, I started preparing dinner. I made a simple roast chicken with all the trimmings, Lenora's favorite. It was a small gesture, perhaps, but I wanted to show them that despite everything, I was still their family. Whether they appreciate it or not is another matter, I thought, stirring the gravy. The aroma filled the house, a comforting, familiar scent. I set the table with my best china, the delicate porcelain gleaming in the soft lamplight. I lit candles, adding a touch of elegance to the room. It's almost like old times, I sighed, a bittersweet ache in my chest. Just as I finished setting the table, I heard a car pull up outside. I glanced at the monitor, watching as Julian and Lenora stepped out of the car. They looked tired from their journey, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion and annoyance as they fumbled for their keys. Of course, they wouldn't find them. I'd changed all the locks yesterday, a small but significant act of reclaiming my territory. They rang the doorbell repeatedly, their frustration growing with each unanswered chime. Finally, Julian pounded on the door, his voice raised in anger. "Mom, open the door." "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, composing myself before pressing the intercom button. "Julian," I said, my voice calm and steady, "can you read the sign?" There was a moment of silence. Then Julian's voice, strained with disbelief. "Respect is required for entry, precisely," I replied, my voice firm. "I'll be happy to open the door when you both demonstrate an understanding of what that means." The security camera captured their bewildered expressions perfectly. Lenora looked shocked, while Julian's face was a mask of fury. This was my house, and from now on things were going to be different. I turned away from the monitor, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over me. The roast chicken was almost ready, and I had a feeling this dinner was going to be interesting. The crisp morning air felt like a new beginning as I stepped into Trish Gable's law office. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the shadowy anxiety that had clung to me for weeks. "Good morning," Trish greeted me, her voice warm and reassuring. "Ready to finalize everything?" I nodded, clutching my handbag. "More than ready," I replied, a small, determined smile playing on my lips. We moved to a small conference room, the scent of fresh coffee lingering in the air. Trish spread out a series of documents on the polished table. "Now," she began, her tone professional yet gentle, "this living will ensures that your wishes regarding your property are legally binding." She pointed to specific clauses, explaining the intricacies of each one. "This is the crucial part," she emphasized, tapping a section with her pen. "This states unequivocally that the house remains solely yours, and no alterations to ownership can be made without your express consent." I leaned in, studying the words carefully, a sense of quiet power settling over me. This piece of paper, with its formal language and official seals, represented more than just legal jargon. It represented my reclaiming of what was rightfully mine, my hard-earned security, my home. "This also outlines your wishes for the property's future," Trish continued, "including who inherits it upon your passing." I had already made those decisions, difficult as they were. Lenora, despite everything, was still my daughter, and Julian, although I barely knew him, seemed a decent enough young man. They would inherit the house, but only on my terms, and only after I was gone. This was my way of ensuring that the disrespect I had endured wouldn't define my legacy. "Everything seems to be in order," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "Is there anything else I need to do?" Trish smiled. "Just sign here, here, and here," she indicated, pointing to the designated spots. I took the pen, the smooth metal cool against my fingers. With each stroke, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, the burden of anxiety replaced by a sense of quiet triumph. As I signed the final document, a sense of peace washed over me. This wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my sense of self-worth. It was about setting boundaries, about ensuring that my voice, however quiet, would finally be heard. "Thank you, Trish," I said sincerely, gathering my things. "You've been a tremendous help." "It's been my pleasure," she replied, her smile genuine. "Knowing that you have the security you deserve brings me peace of mind too." Leaving the office, the sun seemed to shine even brighter. I drove home, a plan forming in my mind. It wasn't a malicious plan, not one driven by bitterness or anger. It was a plan of quiet assertion, a subtle re-establishment of the order within my own home. I stopped at the hardware store, picking up a new set of locks for every door, both inside and out. I also purchased a small, elegant sign, the kind you see at the entrance of upscale establishments. I had it engraved with a simple message: "Respect is required for entry." Back at the house, I worked diligently, replacing each lock with practiced efficiency. It was a physical act, a tangible manifestation of the changes I was making in my life. With each click of the new lock, I felt a renewed sense of control, a quiet affirmation of my autonomy. Finally, I hung the sign on the front door, its brass lettering gleaming in the afternoon sun. It was a small gesture, perhaps, but a powerful one nonetheless. It was a declaration, a silent statement that things were different now. Standing back, I surveyed my work, a sense of satisfaction filling me. The house, once a source of anxiety and resentment, felt like home again. It was my space, my sanctuary, and I was in control. The quiet revenge, if it could be called that, was complete. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. The house was secure, my legal rights were protected, and my dignity was restored. The locks were changed, the sign was up, and the message was clear: respect, not entitlement, would be the currency of entry from now on.